If you feel exhausted all the time, even though you're doing everything right, what if the problem isn't you? What if it's the fact that you've gotten really, really good at functioning under a level of stress and pressure that was never meant to be sustainable or permanent in the first place? Because once you start to see that, it changes the entire conversation. And in today's episode, I'm going to explain why you might feel behind, no matter how much you do to stay on top of things, and more importantly, why this is not your fault. Welcome to Burnout-Free Me, your success and well-being podcast. I'm Dr. Amy Grimm, and I am so glad you're here. Let's go from burnout to breakthrough together. Hello, my friends. Welcome back to Burnout-Free Me. You're listening to episode number 146. I'm your host, Dr. Amy Grimm, and today we are talking about something that I know is going to hit a little close to home for many of you, because this is one of the most common experiences I see in the women I work with, and honestly, it's something I have lived myself. It's that feeling of being constantly exhausted, but not really understanding why. Because if you zoom out and you look at your life on paper, everything looks fine. You're responsible, you show up, you care about your work, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, you're handling your lives, you're functioning, and yet underneath it all, you still feel like you're running on empty. And what makes this so frustrating is that it doesn't make sense. Because the default assumption that most of us have is that if I feel this way, I must be doing something wrong. There must be something missing. Maybe it's time management. Maybe I need a better routine, or I need to be more disciplined, or maybe I just need to push through this phase and eventually it'll pass. But the women I work with, and I have a feeling if you're listening to this, this is probably you too, they're not lazy. These women are not unmotivated. They're not the ones dropping the ball. They're the ones who always figure it out. They're the ones people rely on. They're the ones who get it done no matter what. And ironically, that is part of the problem. Because when you are someone who can always figure it out, when you're the person who can always push through, when you are always handling everything, you don't get the same feedback that something is off. You don't get that crash that just forces you to stop. Instead, you just keep going. And over time, something very subtle starts to happen. Because at some point, the level of stress and output that you are operating under, it stops feeling temporary and it starts feeling normal. You get used to being busy all the time, and you get used to always having something on your mind. You get used to that low-level pressure that's just running in the background of your day. And you get used to carrying a lot of responsibility. And because you can handle it, you just keep going. But here's the part that nobody really talks about. Used to it is not the same as okay. Being used to something is not the same as it being okay. Because your body does not thrive in chronic stress. Instead, it adapts by compensating. And for a while, that compensation works. You can keep up, you can perform, you can maintain the image of somebody who has it all together. But underneath that, your nervous system is working overtime to keep you there. And eventually that catches up with you. And this is why so many high achieving women feel exhausted, even when nothing is technically wrong. Like there's no crisis, there's no obvious problem to fix. It just feels like this constant underlying depletion that you cannot quite explain. And this is the point where most high achievers double down on trying to fix it the wrong way because we try to optimize our schedule and we try to be more efficient and find the perfect morning routine and to try and manage our time better. And don't get me wrong, those things can absolutely be helpful, but they are not the root of what is going on here. Because if this were just a time management problem or a discipline problem, then having time off would solve it, or taking a break and coming back with more motivation would fix it. Having the weekend to yourself would completely reset you. But that's not what happens, right? You sit down to rest and your brain is still going, and you try to take a day off, and instead of feeling relaxed or doing fun activities, you just feel behind. And if you try to slow down, it can feel uncomfortable and almost like you're doing something wrong. So those things have nothing to do with a scheduling problem. That absolutely has to do with your nervous system. And when you have been going in what I call go mode for a long time, your body starts to treat that level of stress as its new baseline. It learns that, oh, this is what life feels like. So it's always thinking ahead and planning and trying to solve problems and carrying the responsibility. And if you're someone who cares deeply about doing a good job, and if you feel a certain level of responsibility for your outcomes and you don't want to let people down, then your nervous system reinforces this pattern even more. And it learns that you don't really ever get to fully turn off. So even when nothing is actively wrong, even when there's no immediate problem to solve, your body does not fully stand down. It stays slightly activated, slightly alert, slightly on. And that creates a kind of chronic exhaustion that sleep alone doesn't fix. And this is the part that can feel really confusing because you might be doing all the right things. You might be getting enough sleep. You might be taking your time off and using your PTO and trying different ways to rest and relax. But if your nervous system is still in that underlying state of activation, you don't actually feel restored. You still feel tired, but wired. That's that feeling of being depleted, but still unable to fully relax. There's a little bit of agitation there. And you feel like you should feel better, but you don't. And then your brain tries to make sense of that. Our brains try to come up with stories that reflect our sense of reality. So then your brain starts asking these kinds of questions like, what is wrong with me? Why can't I just relax? Why does this feel so hard? And if this is you, I want to interrupt that thought right there, because nothing is wrong with you. You are not broken or failing. You don't lack discipline. Your nervous system has just adapted to a level of demand that is no longer sustainable. It cannot keep this up long term. And now it's sending you signals and asking for something different. And that is a very different interpretation than most high achievers are operating from. Because most of us get stuck trying to fix ourselves. We try to become more efficient and more productive and more capable. And we're trying to close this gap that doesn't actually exist. So what I would like to offer you is, what if the problem is not that you're not doing enough, but rather that you have been doing too much for too long without the kind of support and recovery that you actually need? What if the exhaustion you're feeling is not a sign that you are failing or falling behind, but instead a sign that your body is trying to get your attention? And I know that for a lot of you, even hearing that might bring up some resistance. I certainly remember that when I first started this journey. Because there's a part of you that is thinking, well, okay, Amy, but I can't just stop. I can't just do less. I still have responsibilities and I have expectations and I have people who rely on me. And yes, I get it. And I want to be very clear that this is not about blowing up your life or abandoning your responsibilities. This is about understanding what has been happening underneath the surface so that you can start making different choices from a place of awareness instead of pressure. Because when you understand that your exhaustion is not a personal failure, it changes how you respond to it. Because instead of trying to override it or push through, you get curious about it. And instead of asking, what is wrong with me? You start asking a different question. What has my nervous system adapted to that might not actually be working anymore? What is my nervous system adapted to that might not actually be working anymore? And that question opens up a completely different kind of conversation, because now we're not trying to fix you. We are trying to understand you. We are looking at the patterns you've been operating in, the level of responsibility you've been carrying, the expectations you may have been meeting, and the pace that you've been trying to maintain. And we're asking the question, is this actually sustainable? Is this actually supportive? Or is this something I have just gotten used to? And that is where real change starts to happen. Not from forcing yourself to do more or just get it done, but from recognizing where your body has been compensating and giving it the opportunity to do something different. And we're going to talk a lot more about what actually helps with this, because I will tell you right now, it is not just rest more or take a vacation or a week off. It is much deeper than that. It is more nuanced than that. And it is also a lot more doable than you might think. But for now, the most important shift I want you to take from this episode is this. Instead of asking, what is wrong with me? Try asking, what has my nervous system adapted to that might not actually be working anymore? Because when you start looking at it that way, things begin to make a lot more sense. And that is the first step in creating a sustainable, burnout-free life. Thank you so much for being here and for listening and for being willing to have these conversations with me. And if this episode resonated with you, I want to invite you to download my free Rest and Recovery Guide for Burnout. In it, I walk you through 7 ways to support your nervous system that actually helps your body recover and not just temporarily check out. You can do this by subscribing to my brand new Substack And when you do, you will receive the guide as a gift in your inbox. And if you want more conversations like this, deeper, more honest, more real, make sure you're subscribed to the Substack because that's where I'm going to start sharing a lot more of this work as it evolves. And you can use the link in the show notes or go directly to amygrimm.burnoutfreeme.substack.com. That's amygrimm.burnoutfreeme.substack.com. And I'll see you in the next episode.